Well, it is July, and that means we are moving into a new fiscal year, a new academic year. So it is time for us to look back at the top 10 college basketball storylines from the previous 12 months. Let's get after it.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a 5 times per week national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your co-hosts. I'm Andy Patton. He's Isaac Schade. And today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Happy July, everybody out there. We are very close to Independence Day. And of course, as everybody likes to celebrate, the start of the new fiscal academic year in college athletics. No, I know that's not exactly the most exciting thing. Although this year, with the calendar flipping from June to July, we saw BYU and Houston and UCF and Cincinnati join the Big 12. We saw Conference USA get blown up and turn basically into the American Conference. We're going to talk about some of that stuff, but really what we want to focus on today is just looking back at the last year of college athletics, the last year of college basketball, what happened, the biggest storylines. So what we did is Isaac and I each made our own individual top 10 lists of the biggest college basketball storylines from the last year, starting July 1st last year to July 1st this year. We have not looked at each other's lists, so we're going to be learning in live time what each other is planning to talk about for their top 10 lists. We'll hear Isaac's to start off, we'll hear mine in the second segment, and then we'll kind of wrap it up, talk about some honorable mentions to close out the show. I'm really excited about this. It'll be kind of fun to see where these storylines are and what they might mean for the future of college basketball. So Mr. Schade, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you kick us off here and talk about what your biggest storylines were for college basketball this past year.
I love it, Andy. I'm so excited for this. Honestly, as similarly minded as we are, I would be shocked if we had fewer than like 7 that were the same. But man, lots of fun stuff. Also, for those of you watching, I am rocking right now a Braves pullover because they have 8 players selected to the All-Star game this year, a franchise record. The Bravos have won 23 of their last 26. Stupid stuff. Anyway, here's what we're going to do, folks. I'm going to give you my first 5. Remember, we're a 30-minute show, so we got to go pretty rapid fire here. I'm wasting time already.
You talking about the Braves isn't on the docket?
No, it definitely needs to be because they're the best team in all of baseball, dadgummit. Anyway, my top 5, we'll go from 10 down to 6 in descending order there. So number 10 for me is the positive side of NIL and how it kept so many traditional bigs that the NBA don't want, but give them to us, we do. How many of those guys stayed around because they could do so much better in college, just in terms of financial remuneration. And so I'm thinking about guys like Drew Timme and reigning National Player of the Year, you all are with me. We're talking about last year. Oscar Tshiebwe, Hunter Dickinson, Armando Bacot, Trace Jackson Davis. We could go on and on, but those are just that's just 5 of the biggest names in the front court that all came back to school last year to, let me look back, Gonzaga, Kentucky, Michigan, North Carolina, and Indiana. So not only is it 5 big guys, but at big time schools. Yeah. Andy, that's massive for our sport. Number 9. We had a wide open Final Four this year, 1 year removed from a bluiest of blue bloods Final Four. Remember 2022, it was Kansas winning over North Carolina, and the other 2 Final Four participants were Duke and Villanova. Just silly. And then this year, Florida Atlantic, San Diego State, Miami, their second consecutive Elite 8, by the way, and UConn. And now UConn, I think we both agree now is a blue blood, but those other 3, man, that first Final Four for all of them, Jim Larinaga was the only coach with Final Four experience. Wild stuff, especially when you look at the year-to-year participants. Number 8 for me on my list, 15 seed Princeton advances to the Sweet 16. And it's bigger than just that by itself, because that means, Andy, we're continuing to see this parity grow at a pretty exponential rate. This is the 3rd straight tournament that we've had a 15 seed win multiple games and the fourth time overall. So the others are Florida Gulf Coast, Dunk City in 2013, Oral Roberts in 2021 with Max Acemus now at Texas. That's still wild to me. And then St. Peter's making the Elite Eight in 2022. Folks, we're flying along here. Number 7, the whole Bob Huggins and West Virginia saga. This is the most recent event on my list, except the second half of it. Back on May 8th, we had the issue with Coach Huggins on the radio show and the slur, unfortunately, that we thought maybe that would do him in at that point. But then just a little bit over a month later back, I woke up to the news on Saturday, June 18th, that Coach Huggins had a yikes type DUI. Not all DUIs are created equally. We talked at length about that. And then we quickly learned of his resignation later that same day. And ultimately, it seems like it will be his retirement. You never know with these guys. And then number 6, rounding out my first 5, is Kansas State. And there's multiple pieces to this. So I just want to say Kansas State. Jerome Tang, finally getting that head coaching opportunity. I love that after his long tenure at Baylor with Coach Drew. Keontae Johnson, after all his medical history at Florida, just getting the chance to play basketball again, period. But then being an absolute dude. Excuse me, folks. And then Marquise Noel just being his, I don't know who was Batman and who was Robin. I think this was on and off. But what a year for him. He was the king of New York City at MSG in the East Regional. 20 points, 19 assists against Michigan State, 30 points, 12 assists in the loss to FAU in the Elite Eight. And then Kansas State, just at the big picture level, they were projected 10th or ranked 10th in the preseason polls in the Big 12, and they wound up having a phenomenal season. They were the 3 seed in the nation's best conference. They were a 3 seed in the NCAA tournament, and as I just said, made the Elite Eight. A phenomenal year for the Wildcats in the Little Apple, and then the little guy, Marquise Noel, made a name for himself in the Big Apple. Great stuff, Andy. So many cool storylines there.
Those were fantastic. The Kansas State one is one that I didn't have on my list. The rest, I may have phrased them differently, but I basically had a similar group there. We'll talk about that momentarily, but the Kansas State one is excellent, and I think a larger part of that storyline that spans multiple years is these longtime assistant coaches really having a lot of success when they finally get head coaching jobs. And there's 2 that really stand out to me: Jerome Tang, of course, and then Tommy Lloyd getting that head coaching job at Arizona after 2 decades at Gonzaga. And I think I wonder if we will start to see more teams. I mean, because Arizona obviously was a really high profile program, and it was kind of startling to see them hire somebody without any head coaching experience. Kansas State, obviously a high major program in the best college basketball conference, but not a program that was really had a lot of recent success. So they were a little bit more likely to gamble on somebody like Tang. But I wonder now, with the amount of responsibility that is being tasked to associate head coaches, if we're going to start to see more of them getting these, they don't have to, be an associate head coach at a high major program and then go get a low mid-major head coaching job and work your way up. You start to see them get hired right into those big jobs. And Tommy and Jerome obviously had a ton of success. And I wonder if that will continue kind of out of seeing these 2 programs do that.
Yeah, because we had this hire an alumni player for a while, and you wonder if that era is over, and now we're going to get to this assistant era. So that'll be interesting to watch. Andy, let's move into my top 5. Number 5, Brandon Miller took the nation by storm, wound up as the number 2 overall pick in the 23 NBA draft. Something that neither of us. I mean, he was a high level recruit coming in, but not the guy you expected to go number 2 in the NBA draft. And he just had an absolute year down in Tuscaloosa, which unfortunately involved, at least tangentially, being involved in a murder of
a murder case, at least. Yeah.
And didn't face any punishment from Nate Oates. Felt like the Alabama program didn't help do him any favors, right? I think obviously Brandon Miller wishes he could go back and do that differently, but at some point the adults needed to help him by making the right decisions and at least holding him for a while the investigation went on. But just all in all, a big time year for Brandon Miller, but there is that note on it. We move to number 4. University of North Carolina goes from preseason number 1 to unranked in a couple of weeks. In fact, as they lost 4 straight games from November 25th through December 4th to Iowa State, that same Alabama team, at Indiana, at Virginia Tech, they became the earliest preseason AP number 1 to ever fall out of the AP top 25 in the 25-team era, and just the 6th AP preseason number 1 ever to do that, which dates back to the 48-49 season. And oh, by the way, they were the first ever AP preseason number 1 to not make the NCAA tournament. Yikes. Really curious to see what happens moving forward. Number 3 on my list, for just the second time ever. I already had the 15 seed on the list. You got to imagine I had the 16 seed upset higher. We had a 16 seed upset a 1. Virginia famously, or perhaps better, infamously, was the first to ever do it, lost to UMBC in 2018. And then we know that Virginia was the 2019 national champions. Well, Fairleigh Dickinson upset what you and I already thought was the most tenuous number 1 seed this season, Purdue 63-58. Purdue's getting just about everyone back. We'll see if they can replicate what the Cavs did in 2019. Moving to number 2 for me, we had the Bob Huggins stuff earlier. This is another coaching whoopsie. Whoopsie's probably very too kind of a word, but the Texas coaching movement this year. Chris Beard was arrested December 12th, fired January 5th, and then was ultimately hired on March 13th at Ole Miss. Andy, when I put the timeline like that, it boggles my mind how quickly he was rehired. So we'll see how that plays out. But then we got to get to the happy side of it, which is Rodney Terry getting this opportunity. We speculated a lot on if Texas would trend down after they had a great start to the season. But man, Coach Terry kept that team going. They frankly didn't really miss much of a beat. And then was hired Coach Terry full-time on March 27th. And all that is because he kept the team together, got a 2 seed in the Big 12 tournament, won the Big 12 tournament, and then they got a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament and were essentially a second half collapse against Miami away from making a Final Four. Congrats to Coach Terry there. And obviously the Chris Beard stuff, man, that was weird and interesting, but definitely a major storyline this season. And then number 1, I got to go with this team that prior to the season, we got to give our guy Leif Tulin a shout out because he liked UConn more than most. But neither you or I saw this coming. Andy, do you mind if I give you that ignominy along with me there? But UConn becomes, in terms of NCAA tournament margin of victory, the most dominant national champ we've ever seen. The only national champion to win all 6 games by 13 or more points, and the 5th champ ever to win all 6 games by double digits, joining Michigan State in 2000, Duke in 2001, North Carolina in 2009, and that dominant Villanova team in 2018. Andy, that's my top 5.
Very, very, very similar to mine. Not surprised at all. We'll, of course, get to that momentarily. I did not have the Chris Beard thing on there, and part of it is because Texas kind of kept on rolling. Certainly Chris Beard, everything that happened in December, when the police report came out, when he lost his job in Texas, moved very swiftly on that. I mean, it was a massive, massive storyline. And the fact that Rodney Terry kept that team together, and then even coming into this offseason, they lost a ton of talent. So many guys graduated, were out of eligibility. They lose Ron Holland, and it kind of looked like, are the wheels about to fall off for Coach Terry? And then he went out and landed Caden Shedrick, got Dylan DeSue back, and lands Max Asmus, and all of a sudden it's like, oh well, I think Texas is going to be back again. So shout out to Rodney Terry for a really, really nice job taking over a program that really needed some leadership.
Man, Big 12 is going to be super fun again, Andy. I can't wait to see it. You know what else I can't wait to see is your top 10 list of college basketball storylines from this past 12 months. Folks, we're going to get to that in just a second. But before we do so, I need to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets, up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run. All on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid not 8 months from now, instantly, Andy Patton. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on. FanDuel, official betting partner of Major League Baseball. Folks, thanks for making Locked On College Basketball your first listen or watch of the day. Hey, you everydayers, we love that you're with us all throughout the summer, even as we flip the calendar to July. Speaking of which, as Andy said earlier, with that, we get 4 new additions to the Big 12. I'm going to talk to a couple of those new additions on tomorrow's show as we celebrate Independence Day and Jeff Goldblum and Will Smith in that wonderful movie. So, Andy, if you would, my friend, give us your list numbers 10 through 6.
Happily, my friend. We're going to start at number 10, and towards the bottom of my list, it gets a little different than yours. When we get to the top, we'll see quite a few similarities, as you might expect. Number 10 for me, though, one that I didn't see on yours, Conference USA absolutely killed it in the NCAA tournament. I mean, not just in the NCAA tournament, in every tournament. I mean, this was a conference that really showed out when they got an opportunity to in March. Obviously, FAU was the biggest storyline there. They go all the way to the Final Four. Dusty May looking like one of the best young coaches in the entire country. And of course, FAU locks him up for a long time, which was really, really brilliant on their part. But not only did FAU make that tremendous run, we also saw UAB and North Texas play each other in the NIT championship. 2 more schools from Conference USA playing for the NIT title, and Charlotte, also in the Conference USA, won the CBI. That is an incredible, jaw-dropping, probably not repeatable run for those 4 teams. Unfortunately, the Conference USA doesn't really get to reap the benefits of that going forward because all 4 of those programs joined the American Athletic Conference. And it's just a bummer. I mean, I get it. I good for those schools. They get to go to a better conference. The AAC picks up 4 really good schools after losing Houston and Cincinnati and UCF. So this is a big get for the American Athletic Conference. Obviously, we know those schools are a big get for the Big 12, and it's kind of just continues to go down the pipeline. But seeing Conference USA have that kind of success was really fun, even if it was fleeting, because they're not going to be in that conference going forward. Number 9 for me, effectively, it's San Diego State going to the national championship game. I kind of talked about Lamont Butler specifically hitting a game-winning shot. We hadn't really seen any buzzer beaters in the NCAA tournament. Julian Strother came pretty close to hitting a buzzer beater against UCLA in that Sweet 16 game, but Lamont Butler hit a straight-up buzzer beater. And for us to have to wait until the Final Four to see one, it was well worth it. And for San Diego State, coming into the season, you know, obviously there's more conversation about the Big Ten and the Pac-12 and their droughts, but the Mountain West has been historically awful in the NCAA tournament, and it was well talked about this year. People were not picking San Diego State. It was a popular 12-5 upset. It was one that I had on my bracket, and I watched as they not only didn't lose in the first round, they went all the way to the national championship. Tremendous stuff by Brian Dutcher, a program that has a lot of players coming back and is going to be dangerous once again next year, even though, and this isn't one that we talked about, but we kind of thought they might be in a different conference by now, and here we are in July, and San Diego State's still in the Mountain West, but going to be a tough program to get out next year regardless. Number 8 for me is one you already talked about, so I won't go into too much detail. That is Bob Huggins. I think you had that 7th or so on your list, so we had it in a very similar spot on our 2 lists. But of course, Bob Huggins, a tragic way to see a Hall of Fame coach's career end, a justified way to see a Hall of Fame coach's career end, to be clear, but still not the way that we wanted to see this go. But another storyline that's still kind of developing as we see what happens with West Virginia going forward. Number 7 for me, you touched on it a little bit in the NIL conversation, but really it's just the portal is chaos. The transfer portal is complete and utter chaos at this point. And I don't necessarily think that's
still in July.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's still right now. It still is. You know, I think we're still talking about players like Paul Mulcahy, who's available, Joe Toussaint. Obviously, West Virginia is part of that conversation, but we've also seen there's accusations of tampering. I remember when Ryan Nembhard entered the portal and everybody's like, Tommy Lloyd was tampering. And if he was, he did a bad job of it because he didn't ban Ryan Nembhard. But like, I don't, things will change eventually. Things will kind of slow down as the COVID eligibility runs out for players too. But it was a huge storyline throughout the year, how busy the transfer portal was, how much late transfer moves there were. It was just, it's a lot. It's a very different era of college basketball. And we felt it throughout the entire year. And then number 6 for me was the complete dominance of the Big East this year. The Big East was back. I mean, they looked like the best college basketball conference. If the Big 12 didn't exist, I don't think it would be even a debate, but the Big 12 Big East kind of battles this year were epic. And I think Marquette going from being picked 9th in the preseason Big East to winning the Big East and getting a number 2 seed. I know they didn't do as well in the tournament as they hoped, but really nice job from Shaka Smart. Sean Miller and Xavier were much better this year than expected. Of course, UConn, we'll talk about them. We've already talked about them, but it was interesting to see the Big East have this monstrously successful season, better than anybody thought they would be. And they didn't do it with Villanova. In fact, Villanova was pretty bad last year. I think they'll turn it around. I think Coach Neptune's, he's a good enough coach that I think things are going to kind of swing in their direction here soon. But to see the Big East be as good as the Big East was last year, while Villanova had a significantly down year, was definitely a big storyline of the past year.
Yeah, man, just absolutely crazy. Andy, I love those 6. It was funny you laughed about Conference USA not being able to reap the rewards from their success. I tell you what, they're going to get all of those tournament units that FAU just won them. So
that's true.
in that regard, literally reaping millions out of it. So I know that they'll take that, man. Anyway, special thing, that Lamont Butler shot. And I mean, that's just historic for the Aztecs. That is a shot they will he and they as a university will remember. Wouldn't it be funny if they wind up being the team to go to the Pac-12 and break the Pac-12 curse? That would be a thing I'd love to see.
That would be a decade storyline, like top storylines of the decade. San Diego State does that
100%. Here's what we need is San Diego State going there and they play UCLA or USC in the national championship game. Whoever wins breaks the drought. I love it. And I would love to see that.
That would be incredible.
Andy, I do love that top, that last 5 of yours and all the craziness of the transfer portal. Thankfully, this year's rising seniors are the last class with COVID eligibility for those who aren't aware of that. And then that helps make our lives a bit easier. Andy, hit us with that top 5, my friend.
Well, it's a lot like your top 5, so we don't have to spend as much time on them. Number 5 is a little different. Zach Edey's dominance, I kind of separated that. We will talk about Purdue, shockingly, momentarily, but Zach Edey just kind of ran the table in the National Player of the Year conversation, and that doesn't happen all that often, especially in a year where, as you alluded to, a lot of the conversation was Oscar Tshiebwe's back, Trace Jackson Davis is back, Hunter Dickinson's back, Drew Timmy's back, Trace Jackson Davis is back, and Zach Edey was a part of that conversation, as well as some more periphery guys like Marcus Sasser and Azuolas Tubelis and a few others, but pretty much in November, when Purdue smacked the tar out of Gonzaga in the Phil Knight Invitational, from that point forward, Zach Edey was the player of the year. And it was really never in question. I think we had conversations about, okay, who's going to be second? Like it didn't matter anymore. And I mean, for Zach Edey, the talent was always there. As you could see that he was good enough to be that caliber of player, that dominant of a force, but he needed to be able to prove he could play 30-something minutes per night, and he was on a team with a bunch of freshmen. And, is this going to work out for him? And I mean, you could argue the results at the end of the season certainly did not, and I think he would argue that too. But he took home some serious hardware and did it in a really dominating fashion. And in an era where there's so much high-level talent concentrated in college basketball, to be the definitive best player in the country is pretty dang impressive. Number 4. You had this one on your list as well, North Carolina from 1 to unranked. Just a shocking story for them. I think the headline now will be, how does Hubert Davis respond to this? They go out, they get Harrison Ingram, they get Cormac Ryan, Elliot Cadeau reclassifies. I think this is a program. They get rid of Caleb Love, which might be some addition by subtraction. Not that he's a bad player, but he wasn't a good fit. And I think we look forward at North Carolina and I'll tell you this, I don't think they're going to miss the NCAA tournament again next year. That's for sure. They're probably not going to be preseason number 1, but they're not going to miss the tournament. Number 3 for me, the Alabama and Brandon Miller situation, and you covered this beautifully, Isaac, so I won't go into much detail there. I think that the coaching staff really kind of failed Miller here in some ways of not protecting him and not handling the press conferences very well, letting him go out there and get dapped up by a teammate, which was a really horrendous look. And
forgot about that.
I think Brandon Miller has kind of gotten past some of this a little bit, and I think that his initial involvement maybe wasn't as bad as it seemed initially, but part of that is because nobody did a good job of protecting him. And it was sad to see that happen the way that it did, but what a season he had outside of that obvious situation from a basketball perspective. He was tremendous to watch this year. Number 2, UConn, 5th title in 25 years for the Huskies, unquestionably a blue blood program. I don't know if this debate is still being had by others, but it's not being had by me. I'll tell you that. That is a tremendous accomplishment for them. Danny Hurley outcoached everybody that he coached against in the NCAA tournament. I mean, Adama Sanogo was excellent. They had a really talented team, but that was a world-class coaching job by Dan Hurley to take that 4 seed and have them run through the NCAA tournament in dominant fashion. And then number 1, again, nobody should be shocked by what this one is on your top 5 as well. For the second time in NCAA tournament history, a 16 seed defeats a 1 seed. Fairleigh Dickinson defeats Purdue, a team that we weren't sure whether they were belonging on that 1 seed. I think they earned the seed, but we knew they were tenuous, like you said, and certainly falling to a 16 seed in Fairleigh Dickinson was a very notable story that happened in college basketball this past year. And like you said, we'll see if they have the ability to do what Virginia did and kind of put those concerns to rest by winning a championship the next year. Like you said, they return everybody. They might have a shot under Matt Painter, but the loss was a big storyline this year.
They were tenuous, but they weren't that tenuous, man. Wow, it's just absolutely wild. But I do love going back to the other part of your Purdue stuff that you talked about at your number 5 there. I love that for the second straight year, we get the reigning national player of the year back in Zach Edey. That's just good for casual basketball fans. And so I'm really curious to see what UConn does to follow up that historic national championship.
Well, Isaac, we got some honorable mentions to chat about here, some things we didn't quite get to, and maybe some conversation about how some of these storylines might bleed into the next academic year and what that might mean for those. And we're going to cover all of that coming up right after this. All right, folks, it is July. It is the new academic year 2023-24. Next year at this time, we will be talking about our top 10 storylines once again, and I suspect some of the ones we just talked about will be back in a different variation next season. But Isaac, we got some honorable mentions here, some things that we didn't quite get to. I'm going to read through them real quick, and I want to see your response on which one of these maybe stands out to you the most. We kind of already touched on the transfer portal being a massive storyline. We also have Northwestern. They were a number 2 seed in the Big Ten. They made their second ever NCAA tournament. That was a really, really nice job in the Big Ten by Northwestern last year. We had the New Mexico State fiasco, another gun-related incident. There was way too many of those in college basketball this last year. New Mexico State has these tremendous allegations of hazing. Greg Hyatt gets fired. Thankfully, the entire staff gets fired. And in really shocking news, New Mexico State just cancels their season. We've pretty much haven't seen that in a really, really long time. Again, that was a big storyline that would have been bigger had they been a Power 5 program, but this is a program that had made a lot of NCAA tournaments and beat UConn they beat UConn the year before. And then the next year, their season gets bagged in February and UConn wins a national championship. That is a tremendous run of going in the opposite direction for those two programs. The Pac-12 and the Big Ten's championship droughts continue. And then, of course, Miami goes to a Final Four after making the Elite Eight the year previously. Those are all some of those storylines that we didn't quite get to. Are any of those kind of ones that you wanted to touch on a little bit more, or that you think might kind of bleed into this next year as well?
Yeah, I really always love the storylines of teams unexpected to do well, killing it. And so similar to what you said in your Zach Edey conversation about how you and I had conversations about, all right, so who's number 2?
Right.
We did the same thing in the Big Ten as a whole, because it was like, okay, Purdue's clearly going to win this conference. Who's second? And I tell you, never once did I say Northwestern. I think either on one of our shows or another show I was on, I think I said Indiana, might have speculated Illinois, Michigan State. Never So congrats to Chris Collins and that crew for not only making their second ever NCAA tournament. I mean, this is the Big Ten.
Yeah.
And Northwestern was the 2 seed.
Yeah.
Wackadoodle. I love it. And then Marquette, you talked about how incredible the Big East was last year. And in terms of the bleed over into this year that you're mentioning should be again. Yeah. But it's Marquette, as you talked about, that wins the Big East regular season, that wins the Big East tournament, and is another team that outside of Omax Prosper, they're getting all their dudes back. Man, props to Shaka Smart and what he's doing up there. And so I think those would be the biggest 2 out of that list for me.
And I think if you're thinking about future projections here of like what storylines are going to continue, I mean, the Big East, they're not going anywhere. That's for dang sure. I mean, UConn obviously lost a lot of talent. They lose Sonoga, they lose Andre Jackson, they lose Jordan Hawkins, but they bring in some really high level talent as well. Stephon Castle is one of the top prospects in all of college basketball as a freshman next year. They get Cam Spencer. I think that team's going to be great. But then you talk about Rick Pitino taking over at St. John's. I mean, we can already project that. I guess that could have been in this.
That could have been, because it was
definitely going to be part of next year's storyline for sure. How St. John's looks with a just completely new roster, like basically as turned over of a roster as you're capable of having at that level. You get Ed Cooley going over to Georgetown, Kim English jumping into Coach Providence. I think that's a really nice match there. I mean, I think you're looking at a Big East that's going to be probably deeper next year, especially if Villanova ticks up, if Seton Hall can kind of improve from where they were last year, which is going to be tough to do in that league. But man, I don't know that how many of our top 10 are going to be Big East related next year, but I guarantee you it's going to be at least one, probably more than one, because that conference is stacked.
Well, you saying all those things gets me really excited, both for our bold takes conversation, and I imagine we'll do just a top 10 storylines ahead of the 23-24 season. And boy, I just started thinking about some of those as you were talking there, and I got butterflies in my stomach. I can't wait. First games are November 6th, so August, September, October. We are 4 months and 4 days away, Andy Patton. Or 3 days as folks are listening and watching this. So, oh, baby, come on. Let's go. Folks, by the way, speaking of like things like Coach Pitino taking over at St. John's, we want to know what else you think we missed. What were some of your storylines? Let us know in the comments or find us on Twitter or elsewhere.
Well, you're going to kind of touch on one of them here later this week. We're going to talk about the Big 12, adding Houston, adding BYU. I think that's a huge storyline. We're going to chat with Parker and Jake, the host of Locked On Cougars and Locked On Cougars, as they join the Big 12 conference. That's going to be a big part of what we're doing this week. But I think that's going to wrap us up for today. Isaac, it's fantastic conversation. Always love getting a chance to kind of recap the year, put a bow on what was a very, very fun college basketball season. Unfortunately, some of these storylines weren't our favorite things to have to cover. And I think next year we're going to have some of those same things. Unfortunately, that's the nature of how life is. But I really enjoyed getting a chance to break this down. Looking forward to it. And I want to thank all of you for stepping up with us, whether this is your first time listening to Locked On College Basketball, whether it's your 110th time. I'm not sure how many episodes we've done, but let's say it's around there. I appreciate every single one of you. Of course, those of you who are everyday listeners as well, who've checked us out on YouTube, you can go hit that subscribe button there if you have not done so yet. We got some Big 12 chat coming your way later this week. We got some more conversation about the ever-changing and ever-going transfer portal as well. Continued conversation there. Again, thank you all for listening. And until next time, peace out.